All right, hello. Let's go over the first part of our EcoColumn notes today. Fill in your paper as I go through the notes. So let me hit present and we'll get started. So with EcoColumns, we have our three chambers. The top chamber we call the terrestrial chamber because the word terrestrial means land. And it is specifically topsoil. We don't have all of the other layers of soil from the soil horizon that you learned with your summer assignment, but it's really topsoil, which is the A layer of soil. The second one with sand and gravel is our filter chamber that cleans water as it drips through. And so the filter chamber does a few different functions. In nature, when rain comes and it percolates down and soaks into the ground, it gets cleaned by sand and gravel, and then it gets stored in our aquifers or other groundwater. It also, in water treatment plants, they use sand and gravel to clean the water that comes from wherever a water source comes from, a river, a lake, an aqueduct, or the groundwater that's pumped is cleaned, and part of the cleaning process is through sand and gravel. And then wastewater is the water when you're done with it at your house and you flush it down the toilet or down the sinks of your shower or your sinks in the drains. Washing machines have a drain, dishwashers have a drain. And in some wastewater treatment plants, they also do sand and gravel. In Santa Clarita, ours do this. In tertiary treatment, so third stage, which you'll learn later this year, we do an extra cleaning of our water with sand and gravel because it goes into our river, which then is used for agriculture. And there's also endangered species in our river. So for those reasons, we also do sand and gravel as part of the cleaning process. Then we have our aquatic chamber, which mimics a pond. And then also a little bit about gravel. Why did you put gravel under your terrestrial soil and under the filter chamber sand? It's to help with drainage. You can pause this video as you need to fill in the blanks and copy the notes. So we created a top tray sprinkler to gently water while your seeds are germinating. We don't want the force of poured in water from the tap or from a plastic beaker to move the soil around and accidentally bury the seeds too deep or too shallow. So the sprinkler gently waters them as they germinate. As they germinate and grow roots, that's not as big of a deal. We won't actually use the sprinkler for very long because some of your plants are going to grow really quickly, like your peas and beans, and they're going to hit the top, and then we'll just discard the sprinkler. So we cut flaps in the aquatic chamber, and that's to allow airflow, which will be important in 2 weeks when we build our aquatic chambers. And we want air to flow through because it dissolves into the water for the fish to breathe. So in your terrestrial chamber, you planted legumes for a couple of the seeds, and on the roots of legumes, you learned this in biology, but you may have forgotten, there is nitrogen fixing bacteria that live on these little nodules on the roots of legumes. And we want to show nitrogen fixation in our EcoColumns so you can learn parts of the nitrogen cycle. And nitrogen fixation is when bacteria on the roots of legumes and some other places too. So there's nitrogen fixing bacteria, not just on legumes, but a few other places we'll learn about. They turn nitrogen gas from the air into a usable form for plants, which is ammonia. Now plants can use ammonia. So ammonia is NH3 or NH4, depending on which version of the molecule. And but that's it has nitrogen in it. And so plants can use ammonia or ammonium, but they prefer nitrates, but they can still use ammonia. Okay, so next. And by the way, N2, nitrogen gas, it's in our atmosphere. It actually makes up 78% of our atmosphere, is unusable for plants. People and plants can't use the nitrogen in air. So it has to be changed. So the other plants that you planted, whatever they were, whether they were cilantro, basil, radishes, kale, mustard seeds, whatever I have the seeds for, they're going to use the nitrogen in the soil. Your legumes will both make it, well, the bacteria on their roots will make it, and they'll use it, but they tend to make more than they use. So this is why farmers or gardeners who want to increase the nitrogen in their soil, they'll plant legumes. Soy is one. We have peas and beans, but soy is kind of a big one. You can sell your soy crop, and then also it adds nitrogen to your soil. We used Miracle-Gro potting soil, and it has nutrients in it already. The main nutrients are NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Those are our macro. Macro means big, our big nutrients. There's also micro, little other nutrients as well. Things like calcium and magnesium. Potassium's a macro. It's a big one. That's K is potassium. So these little micro ones, plants don't need them in large amounts. So that's what we call micro for small. So in our soil probes, we measure the fertility level over time, and we're going to see it's either going to drop or raise. Usually it drops because the plants are going to use up those nutrients in the soil, but we're going to try and add them in some ways too. Okay, flushing and draining the EcoColumns. So let's talk about that. So we're going to drain these EcoColumns about every day, not some days, but about every day for 2 weeks, because silt in the soil and other suspended particles like the sand is kind of dusty. It's going to clog the gills of fish. So we want to get through all that stuff. So when students say water is dirty, they really mean it has suspended particles. And suspended particles is a term you have to know in AP called turbidity. And we'll learn this more as the year goes on. Now, some of the color in your water, that's kind of like an orangey brown, comes from tannins, which are kind of the dyes in some plants, and it won't hurt the fish. So your water may not completely drain clear, and that's normal because in nature, fish don't swim in perfectly clear water, usually. So the tannins are like the dyes of the plants, and what you're really getting from your soil is there's lots of pieces of ground up bark in there, and the bark leaches out its coloring, which are tannins. It's also tea. So I'm drinking my tea right now, and when the color of tea, the water leaches out what's in the tea. It leaches out the tannins, which makes your tea colored brown or green or yellow or whatever color your tea is. And it also leaches out caffeine and other properties that people enjoy in their tea. So one of the problems, though, of flushing is that we're going to leach out nutrients. So as it's draining, that water as it's going through is going to pull those nutrients, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, out into that water. And so we need to get some of those nutrients back into our soil, and we're going to talk about how we're going to fix that. So the word mitigate is an term, it's an academic vocabulary term that the AP test uses, and that means to fix the problem of whatever the problem is in APES or in some other class. In about a week, you're going to add detritivores. Oh, and going back, so notes coming up are going to talk about ways that we're going to add nutrients. And one of the ways we're going to add nutrients is through detritivores. Yes, worms. Okay, so a detritivore is an animal decomposer. So we have microorganisms that are decomposers like bacteria and fungus, and they take dead things and they recycle those nutrients from the bodies of the dead things into the soil. Some animals do the same, and we call them detritivores. So you need to add, or maybe you've already added, depending on when I assigned this video to you, worms. And you need a couple of worms in your EcoColumn. And you can go hunt them up, or you can buy them at Walmart, like in the bait section. Some of these are bought at Walmart or the pet store. So worms, you also need to add some other detritivores like roly-polies. Sometimes they're called pill bugs or pincher bugs. If you go to the pet store, mealworms is beetle larvae. So that is, it's not actually a worm. They call them a mealworm or a superworm, but they're actually the larvae of beetles. And sometimes they'll turn into beetles while they are in your EcoColumns. It depends on if they've been doused with a hormone. So sometimes at the pet store, they don't want those mealworms turning into beetles because lizards and stuff eat the mealworms. So they douse them with a hormone to prevent them from morphing. So sometimes the mealworms won't change and sometimes they will. And I don't know how to tell which ones will or won't. But it's very cool when you put in mealworms and you find beetles later in a few weeks. And worms are also really important because they're going to aerate your soil. So anytime you're digging outside in your garden or planter or somewhere and you find worms, that's really good. They aerate the soil, which means they create tubes for water and air to flow through your soil. And they recycle matter. So worms are really, really important in soil. You'll also put in leaf litter. So we wait until most of your plants have germinated and then we put the leaf litter kind of around those plants, crumpled up leaves and usually some dried ones. This one doesn't show, oh, kind of down here at the bottom it shows a fresh leaf, so kind of a mixture of fresh and dried leaves. And we're putting them on the surface of the soil. Now, leaf litter is very common in forests and they serve a really important purpose. So in our EcoColumns, it provides food for detritivores. They're going to eat and decompose these leaves and add nutrients to your soil. But that's kind of a slow process, so we're not going to really be able to replace much of our nutrition from this. They also provide hiding places, so your insects that you find do not really like the light and they need some place to hide, and they can hide under there like the roly-polies. They're going to decompose on their own, not just from the detritivores, but fungus and bacteria will also decompose these and add nutrients to the soil. They prevent water loss as well. So they're going to create this layer that when water evaporates out of the soil, it's going to be trapped by the leaves and condense and go back into the soil. And this is why leaf litter is really important. So a lot of people around town, when the leaves fall off the trees in the fall and winter, they blow them all away and get rid of them. Now that's fine on your grass. They're not good on your grass, but in your planters, it should be full of leaf litter. It's going to help the water, so you don't have to water them as much. It's going to help all of the critters there have this habitat for biodiversity. It's going to prevent weeds, so you don't have to pull weeds. It's really, really good for planters, wherever you have some bushes or roses or whatever, to have leaf litter in there. Now, a lot of people don't like it because it looks kind of messy, they think, but it's really, really a good thing for your garden and your plants. Again, not on the grass, it smothers the grass because it blocks photosynthesis, but in your planters, on the bare soil, it's a good thing to have. All right, we're going to stop there, and then the next notes you'll take will be assembling the aquatic chamber.